Hey guys, and welcome back to City Skylines. In this episode I'll work on everything when it comes to the center of the city, and probably not finish it entirely. There are definitely a couple of loose ends that I want to tie together at some point in the future, and there's probably a lot to improve as well, so I would like to at some point probably incorporate some feedback into it. But the basic shape of the city will definitely be made, as well as putting in all the buildings, or nearly all of them really, and also adding some details on the streets, and actually experimenting a bit with adding the textures over the roads instead of just using the road textures themselves, because I really wanted to have some brick textures just to make it look a bit more like it's an actual Dutch city. That said though, I probably need to talk about the newest update of the game, since I haven't actually tried to open the game since the newest update yet. I actually haven't played the game since I just haven't really found the time to, given my recent addiction to Planet Coaster, so I won't actually be messing with, I think they're pronounced keys, or any of the new additions to the game. Well, I've definitely seen them, and I might want to incorporate them at some point in the future in this city. So far, everything is just with the snowfall things, which I think this is actually the first snowfall episode, though I'm not 100% sure about that, but definitely you can still tell that at this point in time there was still the very awkward reflection on the road whenever it would rain. And also something to keep in mind about the fact that this was in snowfall is that ever since my Traffic++ didn't work, and even though I got the game to work again, I haven't been able to get the city file to work, as well as getting the pedestrian paths of Traffic++. So that means that what was formerly all of the concrete roads is now gravel roads, because I don't have the Traffic++ concrete pedestrian roads anymore. And that is sort of an issue in a sense that many of the gravel roads around the city are actually supposed to be concrete roads, and I need to get back to those and actually change them slightly. So that's also why, that's part of the reason why I wanted, or ended up having, gravel roads around this center of the city. Anyway, a bit more about the center of the city itself. It's very much inspired by Willemstad, mostly. There are many different star forts in the Netherlands, but I wanted to look at Willemstad specifically since it really has a very distinctly star shape. Many of the star forts do have the overall star shapes, battlements on the side of the city, but Willemstad is one that actually has a real star shape and isn't deformed in any way, so that was a major inspiration, especially when it comes to the road layout, since much like Willemstad, this one is laid out on a type of grid with more or less a sort of central road going through the city there, where I want to have some central parks and also some central churches and some of the more fancy buildings of this city in general. And then around that, I wanted to quickly have those quick islands. The idea was to have these islands as you normally see them around star forts as well, but in the end they sort of came out a bit sketchy, which is definitely due to the fact that there's a rock texture on that. I would have preferred to be able to have grass textures on that, so this definitely works much better from an aerial perspective than from looking at it from the ground, I think. But yeah, that's the general idea. And also something which is sort of unique though when it comes to the city if you compare it to Willemstad, and makes it more similar to other star forts, is the fact that there is obviously a canal going through it, which pretty much came with the map, which I decided to keep in there, and so it still has something which really differentiates it from Willemstad as well. Now in terms of the buildings, they are pretty much a very random rhapsody of different Dutch looking buildings which I found on the Steam Workshop. But I do have to say I'm not entirely happy about it in hindsight. There are a couple of realism issues in the sense that realistically some of the buildings are a bit strangely scaled. I think this is something I will get back to at some point in the future in real time, I'm not entirely sure. So this is something I should address anyway because it's quite a glaring issue at the moment, is the very fact that many of the row houses which I use, as you can see, the very Amsterdam-ish looking canal houses are really beautiful, but they are very large, especially compared to the other houses which I'm using, among which the Dutch row houses, but also the Willemstad houses, which were actually on the Steam Workshop as well. And this is an issue that I just sort of still had in this episode. Like, you can very clearly tell over here that some of the houses are much smaller than different ones, so that is something which I do still want to change a little bit in the future, and at least chip away in, edit in such a way that the awkward scaling isn't as obvious anymore in the end. But that's pretty much the only real issue I have house-wise. Otherwise, I'm actually really surprised at how many Dutch buildings there still are, and how well it actually came out in the end. Though something I should also add is that this was recorded quite a while back. I think 1 week or so after Snowfall was actually released, so talking a really long time ago. And at the time I didn't have the new Dutch houses yet, which are currently on the workshop, which I definitely would love to pick up for this city. But something to keep in mind is that I am kind of behind when it comes to the footage in that regard, so I didn't have them at this point in time yet. And something else which is sort of a glaring issue at this point in time as well is that the surrounding of the city isn't going to be finished yet. So I just wanted to very quickly sketch out the surrounding shape of the dikes that will be around the center of the city here, but not entirely finish it. And I will still leave that unfinished for quite a while until I have a really good idea about what I want to do with it, which I don't really have at the moment, and I'd rather just focus on the details within the city itself. Which, speaking of which, it was actually a lot of fun to work with the foliage over here. I wanted to do something which is very similar to what many star forts have as well, just some very grid-like tree lines around the outer road, and also some different tree lines around the inner roads as well, and some foliage in between both areas, which I think really just helps to mark out the shape of the city a little bit more, and I think in the end I was quite happy with how that looked. So I basically just wanted to get all of these oak trees around the side of the island, just following the road like that, and then have a second layer of, they're called summer trees. I'm not entirely sure what type of tree it would realistically be, but wanted to have that layer within that as well. And then next to the city at least have some more foliage, which is placed a little bit less manually and a bit more like natural foliage. And that's really what I wanted to do with this. You do see many star forts which have grass on the sides of the hills, but I really just thought it would look a little bit better to have trees over here, and it also in a way sort of helps get rid of the issue that everything looks so very rocky, which I wish it didn't, and I might still want to look into themes with which I can at least get grass everywhere, even on cliff faces, which I think would be really amazing because the rocks start appearing even at pretty gentle slopes, but that's something which I have still to look into. And also something which I got many requests for is to build a city wall around this island instead of just keeping the little dike like this. And while it's something which I definitely thought about and tried to get some different walls into the game to see if I could actually make it happen, there are a couple of issues with it and some reasons why I decided not to go with a wall in the end. First of all, I don't think there are any walls which very convincingly look like Dutch castle walls. Many of them are either very Mediterranean or medieval-ish, and I haven't checked in a few weeks now, but at least at the time when I was building this, I didn't think there were any convincingly Dutch-looking walls that I could use. And also, many of the star forts, if not most these days, don't have their walls anymore, but rather just have these dikes where the walls once stood in pretty much the same shape, which is what I wanted to do over here, and which is what in the end I think looks just a bit more realistic than trying to get a wall in there just for the hell of it, I suppose. Though of course still, if anybody has any type of suggestion or feedback to give about the series or way to improve, I'm always up for that, and I'd gladly see what I can do with it. That sounded way too professional. I just like taking feedback, and it's always great to also be able to look at things from another perspective, and definitely some things, especially when it comes to knowing about certain things in the workshop that I haven't noticed myself, especially since I don't check every day anymore and more like twice a week, I might definitely miss some things as well. And there are definitely also some things in the end which I'm not so sure about. Anyway, I wanted to also detail the city over here, and at this small plaza here, just to decorate this a bit, since I really figured this main strip in the middle of the island could serve as sort of the park and more official building strip, which is why I wanted to have that small museum over there and also a church in the middle of it, which is quite similar to how Willemstad does it as well. And aside from that, also make some quick parks in there. And beside that, I really had to fill the town up with a lot of foliage, because there is also one other issue which I sort of have with these buildings, which is that Dutch buildings in especially towns like this, even though they tend to be very narrow and not that high, they go on for very long. They're very long, so even though these blocks are pretty wide, in real life you would see pretty much just very long narrow strips of houses with just very small alleys streets in between them, which is something which I couldn't really do here because the houses are only 2 tiles deep. There is one which is 4 tiles deep, which is a little better, but it still doesn't get the job done very realistically. So looking back at how the city looks, one of my main issues with it is also that even though it has the overall shape and the buildings really look like Dutch buildings in general, it doesn't quite have the building layouts that you would realistically see from Dutch cities, because the houses and buildings in general are much smaller, which is partly sort of alleviated by having those really large blocks, but then again those blocks aren't very typically Dutch, and I think are actually meant for Dutch towns actually, so they're not the most representative of Holland, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So there are definitely some things which I would still like to improve on this city center. But still, I do have to say as well, I'm actually quite happy with how it turned out so far. I got many requests to actually finally make this episode while I was working on the other episodes, but I really wanted to wait this out until I got enough assets and knew for sure that I could make at least something decent out of it, which is why it took so long, but which is also why at least I'm not too unhappy about it. There's just still a lot of room for improvement, I think. And I also just wanted to very quickly finish this park over here with something quick. Though I do have to say about that, I made a terrible mistake there. I actually placed some football posts over here thinking, well, this will be perfect for a football field. And then at some point, not recording, I think I wasn't recording at the time, I just looked back at the field and turns out that the field was on a slope, and having a football field on a slope isn't entirely the best thing ever, so I decided to at least get rid of that. And over here, I wanted to have the parking places, since I really wanted the center of the city to be as car-free as possible, so sort of realistically, tourists would be able to park their car in here and then move over a bridge to actually go to the city center. So you'd be able to keep the cars and all the heavy traffic out of the city center, which in City Skylines though doesn't really work. Everybody just visits this car park for visiting the car park because it's a park, but that's really just the idea for it realistically. And since the other place where I put the entrance to the city was also sort of just put up there in a hurry just to have a quick entrance to the city, but there was no room really for parking places on the other side, and there won't be any room for it since I will also have some small housing developments near that area. And then over here I just wanted to quickly finish this park in a sort of simple way, but this is where I wanted to have new houses as well, which is one of the decisions which, looking back at it, I'm still not so sure about it. I tried to make it into a park first, but then I was really thinking if this is a park, I would have an amazingly huge park area sort of around the city center and a lot of space which I wouldn't do anything with. And I was really figuring it would be kind of awkward to have that around the central station there. But this is also something which I'm definitely up for feedback to as well, because I'm still not sure if I really want to keep the houses over here. The idea was basically to just at least make this area a bit more dense and make the housing developments over here fit in with the houses which I already have on the other side of this road, and give it that sort of modern suburban style to it, which, even though I'm quite happy with how this small development came out, and it's really inspired by those really small developments which are very newly planned around cities, I'm not quite sure if the placement around here is really the best, and yet I also feel like if I didn't place this housing development here, I'm not sure what else I would really place here, so I'm really on the fence about this area. Regardless of that though, this is what it looked like at the moment, and this is what it looked like at the moment, which is just some simple houses, very large gardens and very large houses as well, and just wanted to make this really one of those more modern and spaced out housing developments. But still, I'm very unsure about the placement, not to mention that it's of course it's awkwardly close to the city center as well, but also it sort of is just underneath that main road over there and very close to the canal as well. So even though it looks sort of spaced out, it really has an awkward placement in the city. And the general issue, I guess, really boils down to, if I keep this place empty, it feels like too large of an empty field to keep in the park, or keep in the city. And if I make it a park, it would really feel like there are too many parks in this area. Yet, to keep it as a little neighborhood with houses, it would feel like it's a little bit too forced and too small and too oddly placed over here. So I'm really not entirely sure what I really want to do with that here. So that's, I guess, why I would be up for feedback. I am in the end still quite happy with how it looked. It's just something which I'm not sure if I really want to place it in the city like this. And now I just wanted to very quickly add some more foliage to at least make that a little bit nicer around the city. But the main thing which I'll actually be doing in the remainder of this episode is get the road textures done, which is something which I really wanted to try, which I hadn't tried up to this point, is to just replace all the roads with gravel roads to make sure that they're all flat and actually put my own textures over them, or at least put textures over them manually, which is something which I really wanted to try because having the asphalt roads is just something which is quite rare in the Netherlands anyway. When it comes to the 3 types of roads in the Netherlands, and you have the roads that are used within neighborhoods and for people to get to around their houses, they are barely, if at all, asphalt roads. And really one of my main issues with the city as a whole is also that it uses so many asphalt roads because there is barely any other way except for, well, doing this manually for every single part of the city. But also just because, especially when it comes to city centers, the color and texture of the roads really makes a really huge difference to how the city overall looks. And so I really wanted to try and get some more fancy brick textures in here. Not just to make it look a little bit more traditional and old-fashioned, but also to get it to look a little bit better as well. And it also allows for a couple of those fun things which often Dutch roads do in the older parts of town, where different roads meet up. There'd be planters or a different brick texture or some type of brick pattern on the middle of the road and things like that, which is, I think, also a fun thing to mess around with. And also, of course, have some sidewalks on the side, which is actually a lot of fun as well. So it's really, I like doing it in terms of that I think it makes a huge difference in how the town overall looks, which I'm quite happy with. But in the end, it is a very time-consuming thing, so I don't think I'll be doing it for the rest of the city at all. It's really just for the city center because it makes a larger difference for the city center than it really does for the rest of the neighborhoods, which at least looks somewhat alright with all of the asphalt roads. Though that said, I do think it was Bo Former. I'm not entirely sure. At least some modder is actually at the moment working on Brick Road I think it's network extensions, yeah, which would be so awesome to have. But until that time, this is pretty much all that I can do, and all that I pretty much wanted to do. And aside from that, I did also want to detail it a bit, especially since gravel roads on their own don't have any lanterns, and I wanted to keep it that way just to be able to place the lanterns myself and get the exact placement which I would want in different places. Like for instance, it's really nice to have, if you have these very large facades, be able to actually plan your lanterns around them and also plan some planters and benches around them as well. Not to mention some small tables and stuff like that to make everything look a bit more alive and like there are actually restaurants, and really that kind of stuff is what I was trying to go for here. And aside from that, I definitely also wanted to have some trees on the roads, though not as much as I would have realistically had, and this is also one of the big limitations of really what you can do, I guess, in the game, because I already had so many different trees in the city just to fill up the holes between the different roads. Since the houses are not as long as real Dutch houses are, I didn't want to fill the roads up with too many trees either, or this entire city center would just end up looking like a forest. And I do have to say, while in the end I'm quite happy with how it turned out, it's really not that entirely realistically Dutch, and I may still want to get back to it, but then again, I'm not sure how much better it'll really get in the future, since it's really hard to get this to be exactly right. But yeah, I might want to return to it. Anyway, thank you guys for watching this episode. Next time I should be doing something which is going to be a little bit easier to actually tackle, which will be various detailing around the city and the university as well. So thank you guys for watching, and see you later.